All right, welcome back, everybody. It is everybody's favorite DigiTuber, Tofu Bandit. Today we're going to be covering an Ultimate Cup guide for the upcoming Cup format, that being the monocolored decks, or at least as close as you can get to it. We're going to be covering the top decks, things you should know into the tournament, things to look out for while you're playing in the tournament, and then at the end I'll probably wrap up with some decks that are just bait, basically decks that people think are good but aren't really digesting the entire situation to understand why they're not. So we're going to start off with things to know. Make sure you do your homework. Understand that this is a different set of rules. Make sure you are brushed up on those and understand that certain cards are not able to be played in those decks. Going hand in hand with that is watch other players while you're playing. If you've played any format where it is either new or slightly altered, players make mistakes. Some players just sign up and don't think about the rules. Some may not understand those rules. Just because you did your homework doesn't mean they are. So you're probably going to see a lot of players try to play cards that they didn't necessarily know were illegal. And I don't think that tournament organizers are actually going to be checking deck lists. I feel like that's more of an attendance checker than anything. So they're probably not going to be checking those to look for illegal cards. Especially with the amount of people that pop up. Be prepared for long games. Again, this kind of goes into the same kind of format as pre-releases or anything that is altered. Basically, people aren't going to understand mechanics. They're probably using new decks or new strategies or things they pulled off of YouTube, so they're not really going to understand exactly how the deck is supposed to run. So they're probably going to be playing slower. With all of these things in mind, try to stay positive. Try to don't let slow players, new players, or players that don't necessarily understand the rule sets. Don't let that bring you down. Just play to have a good time. This is an altered format to get us away from a meta that a lot of people don't really like. So just enjoy that kind of breath of fresh air and just go forward and just try to have as much fun as possible. Obviously everybody wants to win, but if you're just crabby for 8 rounds, is that win gonna really be worth it in the end? So we're going to start with our first deck that we're going to cover. I'm going to try to cover 2 decks for every color. There's a couple that kind of struggle in mono, so I might only have one. But first, we're going to start off with Gallantmon, the red deck. It has DP-based removal, which in a monocolored format, removal might be a little bit harder to come by because certain options, dual-colored options, or things you might run as an off-color aren't really that viable. It does have the ability to target multiple bodies with its removal, which is going to be really useful because if you're going against Bloom Hydra that likes to go wide, you can knock out a couple of those bodies in one go. You're one of the few decks that still can utilize an X antibody line without having access to Cool Boy or options, because the X antibody option just would normally let you blitz, but as you can see with the Takato Tamer, you are able to just give your Digimon blitz when you digivolve anyway, so you don't need the X antibody option. You also have tons of searchability in archetypes, so you don't really need Cool Boy either. So that just frees up more options to run literally more options. So you can run more Crimson Blaze and things like that. There are several counters that are not viable in this format. Things that would just stifle that deck. Things that can die, a Black War Greymon, Melga X that are kind of just too fast or can just dodge it. So with those being out of the format a little bit or less likely to pop up, that does open up a broader niche for Gallantmon, and it still has the ability to, its high end can still trash security, which is extremely important, especially with some of the decks that are probably going to pop up with this monocolored format. Next is War Greymon Tribal. Now, most people, are probably thinking that's ridiculous, blah blah blah. Even though you don't have access to Cool Boy and the X antibody option, you still have cheap evos. You still have it's the most supported archetype in the game, so you have tons of options. You have tons of removal, both in archetype, and Red has some of just the strongest, just hard removal in the game. And with less deletion protection running around, you're going to be set up more for success. You still have access to Greymon X and that X antibody line, so you can still innately build protection for your War Greymon stack, which is beautiful. You might not be able to like swing, go into swing, go into a Mega, clear their security, and go into Blitz Omni, but you can still build those same stacks. You still have your powerful Memory Tamer Tai, which gives you security +1, lets you clear the security. BT1 War Greymon still exists. It's still only a 3 Evo, so you can still do that without passing turn if you have a Memory Tamer. It doesn't check options when it swings, and it gives an additional security check. So you still have access to everything that makes the deck powerful. You just lose some of the busted cards. So while it is more balanced, it is still definitely a viable option, especially in the red archetype. Blue Flare is the first of our blue decks. The total archetype is actually contained in blue. You don't have to run any other colors. Like I know some people splash the Metal Greymon X and the Greymon structure deck one to give additional security, but it is not 100% necessary for the deck to pop off. It still has access to the Metal Greymon Rush for 3 memory, and it still has access to stun. Both of those are still very powerful mechanics, maybe even more so in this format because there's less busted stuff in the format. That's viable. Speaking of which, there's less Tamer removal without Black War Greymon, and Red and Black is just a lot harder to run. At the same time because of certain restrictions that we have in this format. So like Hades Force is not really like super viable because if you're running the red side, you can't really run the mono Black Tamer and vice versa. So you kind of have to like slow your own deck down to be able to justify running Hades Force, and that's just not really going to be that viable in a format like this. Still has access to the strongest generic tamers in Sorijo. You can technically still run your one Tommy if you want to strip sources. You've got access to your in-archetype tamer, Christopher Aonuma, that'll let you save and is searchable off of your options. You still have access to Ice Wall, which is still insane and again more so in a format that is less like rush you down before you have a chance to do anything. So buying yourself that one turn is a lot more effective in a format like this. Next up, we're going to cover Ulforce. It is a deck that is really coming into its own with the newer support, and with there being less Tamer removal in the format. With Black War Greymon probably not going to take up a ton of it, losing out on most of its resources. Your biggest wall is gone. Not completely gone, but is probably less likely to happen. You're very snowball centered, so like once you get your 6 stack and you can start slapping tamers down, it's going to be very hard for your opponent to come back from that without having like a huge Black War Greymon Hades Force blow up your whole board turn. You're able to swing multiple times in a turn, which is insane because if your opponent has multiple suspended bodies, or if you just want to like unlike War Greymon that can swing for all your checks, but then can't swing again, this deck can swing 3 times, so if you get chip damage in early, you can still get that swing for game without, having to go an extra mile. It's VMons, so it's one of the most supported archetypes. You have tons of rookies to choose from. Technically, you can still throw in armors in there because they all are dual color blues. So if you wanted to fix some of those in there just to give you some added protection, that is an option. Now we're on to green, Bloom Hydra. It's probably the strongest monocolored archetype that's out there. It's stayed mono green, yet it's still getting tops. It's still performing very well. Spams the board. It's incredibly consistent with all of its searches. It now has extra draw and memory gain as well. It has access to Grandel Soul, which is a bottom deck, which can dodge a lot of removal in the game, or a lot of removal protection in the game. And with there being less board control in the format, if you're not going up against Gallantmon, you're probably going to be able to go as wide as you want because, Death X is limited to 1, so you don't really have to worry about getting Death X'd, or at least, if you can get over that first one, it's not coming back. And then also, again, Hades Force is going to be a lot less likely to show up. So certain things like that, you can kind of, go a lot wider than you normally would. And since this deck has done so well in a format that is kind of against it and has kind of all the weapons to go against it, but it's still performing well in a format where a lot of its opponents are limited, I think it's going to do very well, and you'll definitely see it at the top tables. Next is Grandis. Now, obviously, Grandis got hit in this Ultimate Cup ban list So it's definitely a lot weaker, but it can still OTK you. It doesn't need X Antibody or Cool Boy to facilitate its combos or do its searches. It still has all that stuff in Archetype. It is still limited to green bricking, but it doesn't need a whole lot of pieces, and that can be extremely powerful. Mimi is still a really powerful tamer, allowing you to get put out a level 5, breed Digimon, get an extra body out there if you need to. So it still has all of these things going for it. So I definitely think you'll probably see some people running it, especially since like if they've been running it for a while and don't necessarily want to build a new deck, it's a lot easier to like pull out the cards that aren't legal and like shove something else in that might work. So now we're on to yellow. We're going to cover Venusmon / Setcon. So this is literally a mono yellow Setcon list, with the Venusmons, with Magna Angemons. You still have access to Reinforcing Memory Boost and Holy Wave as well. So you just have a ton of different options, and you can kind of go. Your stack is pretty much unlimited in security, and in a format that's kind of limited in the amount of checks it can do, and with less like hard protection, except for a fully built War Greatmon stack, you're probably going to be just kind of have your way with a team, and you can kind of stall out until you get something that you need. Venusmon being a top end that just can like completely shut down a board, giving everything minus security attack. It protects itself via its effects. So there's a lot, and you can dodge removal on with the Wind Digivolving effects not being able to proc off of the Venusmon too. So very very good. You still have easy access to double color options because you can run. You can still technically run Ophani Fall Down mode. You could run Mirai just to give you access to a purple source. And since some of the best yellow options happen to be dual colors, you can run Degrade, you can run Flame Hellscythe. You can run those things very easily. You still have access to all of your powerful yellow tamers, being Tai, Mirai, or not Tai, TK. TK Kari, regular Kari, so you still have access to all of these things too. So it's still a very powerful deck, and with less like OTK is still viable, but with less protection, you're more likely to hit something in security. And you can kind of, and since it's going to be a slower format, you're kind of going to be able to do what you want. Because I imagine a lot of Venusmon, or not Venusmon, a lot of Ulforce Veedramon is going to be running around, especially with all the hype that it's getting, and it's kind of setup oriented, and it's got a lot of 3 cost to evolve level 5s, so it can be slower and needs a little bit more time to set up, which can give Venusmon enough time to kind of like build its stack wide enough. And if you take Ulforce Veedramon security attack away, it's not doing anything. It can swing 5 times, and it's not going to check a single card. So that's I definitely see that as a viable option. Next up is Maste Ophane. So this is kind of just like yellow or purple angels. Again, heavily supported archetype. It's got a lot of yellow and purple access, and you won't break your color rules and restrictions for this format because you can run like mono yellow with yellow and purple stuff, or mono purple with purple yellow stuff, and still have access to everything that you would need. Any cards that you would lose from a normal Maste Ophane deck, you can just replace. Like you can still run your Gatomons, and then you can run Meikumons, and then you can run Crackmons as level 5s to kind of cover for the loss of either Lady Devimon or Angelomon. So it doesn't really lose anything. It just kind of like reworks itself a little bit. It's also one of the few decks that have Tamer removal in the form of Loosemon Fall Down mode, which is something you can run if you decide to go with the purple variant. Next up, purple is going to be Beelzemon. Obviously, they probably got the idea for this Ultimate Cup from the success of the Beelzemon Structure Deck pre-release event. And so I think this deck has got a lot of hype coming into it. People are going to be trying to test their pre-builds before, and like with the structure decks added to it. So people are going to, already theory crafting about it. So it's going to be a deck that has a lot of work into it going into the format. It's going to be a slower format. Again, you're going to have your Venusmons. You're going to have your Ulforce Veedramons. Nothing's really popping out, going boom, 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 going up a ladder super quick, and then swinging for 7 checks because the X Antibody's out of the picture. So the only one you have to worry about swinging multiple times is an Ulforce, and that takes a little bit of time to get going. Bloom Hydra likes to build up a huge wide board. It can do it kind of quick, but you're going to have time to set up your graveyard. There's less removal protection in the format. Again, like War Greymon is kind of one of the only ones that can dodge removal. And you having access to Deathslinger and all of the the Beelzemon stacks that can digivolve and delete the highest DP stuff. So it's definitely a deck that's going to something to be watched out for, and something I would recommend studying up on, because you're going to see this one. I would say this one, Hydramon or Bloom Hydra and Ulforce are probably going to be one the most represented decks, with Gallantmon taking a close portion of that. Alphamon is the only black deck that I could really think of that could really have a chance in this format. You could probably argue that Machine Dramon could, but like a lot of Machine Dramon stuff also involves red, and some of it being mono red, it really limits the options that deck can have. Whereas this deck is still entirely searchable off of its rookies and tamers. It still has a powerful inboard in Oryukin. It's still very consistent because of those search powers. It loses the X Antibody option and it loses Cool Boy, but that just gives you more chances to run, things like Congo, DG Dimension, things like that to kind of answer boards. And it's going to be slower format again. I keep harping on this. But you're gonna have time to search your pieces, and if you could put your opponent on a clock, like, hey, I've got Dorugoramon. As soon as I see Dorugreymon, I'm gone. You can really cause your opponent to mess up. And then the Dark Horse, but in this case the White Horse, D Reaper, is going to be a deck that is going to be running Havoc in a monocolored format. Why? Because it did not lose anything from color restrictions. It is the only deck that can still run X Antibody and get value out of it. Mother still dodges most removal. Again, with Black War Greymon less likely to be ran, and probably Metal Greymon, the black-red one, kind of going to be slowing down a little bit, being that it costs 4 and you can't kind of X Antibody your way, brute force your way into a Mega, and it being slower. Your mother's less likely to be swung over, and that's something you can kind of play by ear as well. It still has OTK potential in the form of Reaper. Gatekeeper is still a pain in the ass to deal with, can still pop out, can still recover, can still set up block. This deck is one that you really, really need to be aware of, because it will be there and it will be running Havoc, because it just kind of plays solitaire, and you kind of have to beat it before it, stacks all the way to the ace. Decks that are going to be baits that you're going to want to cover, decks that people are really, really hyping up, namely one that I can think of is Armor Rush. People are really, really excited about Armor Rush because, it's VMon, you can run it, you can still have access to all of your Armor Digimon because they all share blue, but the issue with those is you cannot run Awaken the Gold Digizoid because it's a yellow card. You cannot run Fire Strike or Rocket Punch or whatever that Flame Dramon option is. You can't run that because it's a red. So you can't run the Armor Digivolution, the white card that lets you re-armor. So like most of the supporting options in the deck are completely implausible, and you can't run them. You can't run Chimeramon to DNA Digivolve. So if you're running level 5s, it has to be Magnamon and it has to be Paildramon. And like you don't have, you're not checking 3 cards with Flame Dramon because you can't do that. You're just swinging 1. Okay, cool, it dies. Like you're sticky, but you're really, really losing like the speed. So if you were gonna run a deck like that, you should probably just run Blue Flare because it's gonna do kind of the same thing where it puts on a lot of pressure, but it does it faster, more consistent, and it still has access to Armor Purge via Decker Greymon and Metal Greymon Cyber Launcher. So that's a deck that I definitely wouldn't recommend running. Black War Greymon is another one. A lot of people think, oh man, like if I lose out to, losing Cool Boy and X Antibody isn't that big a deal. But it is. Because 1, you can't run X Antibody, so therefore the protection from Greymon, the Black-Red Greymon X isn't going to proc. You're a true Black-Red deck, but a lot of your rookies are one or the other. We don't have any Black-Red rookies at the moment that we would run, so that deck really, you kind of have to pick a linear line, and if you do, you can't run the other half. So if like you want to go the red half, you can't run, Yuya, you have to run Tai. So Yuya, you're going to lose out on protection that way. But if you go black, then you can't run all of the really strong red Agumons. So you're kind of like split on what you want to do, and this is a deck that really, really needs to be able to use both hard colors of the color pie as well as the melding, and so without that it's going to be really slow. And if you're not running Greymon X, the black-red one, for the protection, you're probably going to be running the red one, which means you're not going to get the memory cost reduction from the black-red one to reduce the cost of your level 5s, thus you're less likely to run the black-red Metal Greymon because costing 4 is insane and it's probably going to pass your turn. So Black War Greymon is another one that I would say is probably a bait. Melga is another one. I don't think that that's really a bait. I think that's just kind of one that people think is kind of universally known that like this is not it's not a good deck in the format, and without having Cool Boy and X Antibody, like the deck is just non-functional. You're just playing great Garurumon Tribal, and you're way less good at it than Greymon Tribal because Greymon has so much more support for what it wants to do versus Melga's support is kind of all over the place with like bouncing, source stripping, multiple swings. Like Greymon is DP security attacks, like that's what it does in the red, whereas Blue's kind of all over the place. So Melga, I would say, is definitely out of the picture. Um, and then any deck that like needs a monocolored card from another color pie part of the color pie is pretty much non viable. Like there's probably a option that you could put in there that might help you facilitate the loss of one of those, but most of the time if you have to run that monocolor card, it's for a very good reason, and the Kroger brand version of it that you shove in there is not going to help you. So yeah, those are the things. And again, this is all part of do your homework, know what you're getting into. If you want to win or you want to perform well, watch out for these decks, be ready for it, and also watch your opponents. I have been Tofu Bandit, and this is the end of the line. Have a good one.